again. Since you've already heard from me before, I'll skip the introduction and get straight into the talk. We're talking this morning about online harassment, and specifically how do we build systems that prevent it, that reduce the risk of it. I'm going to be showing some mechanisms, some practical tips, some ways that I've found that are most successful in reducing online harassment. But before we start, some content warnings. This is a talk about online harassment, so I'm going to talk about online harassment. I'm also going to talk about abuse. There are mentions of things like racism, misogyny, sexism, suicide, rape, and death threats, and there are very brief mentions of some of the other horrible things that people do to each other on the internet. I'm aware that these are uncomfortable subjects for some people. People in this room may have traumatic experiences with these things. And so while it is usually considered poor etiquette to leave a talk midway through, if anybody does feel uncomfortable and wants to step out for a few minutes, I will absolutely not be offended. So let's start off with an example. This is an app called Square Cash. It's a nice little mobile payments platform. It's designed to be fast, easy, much more convenient than using a banking system, than using the online banking system. And you'll see what they have is a chat feature. So you can tell somebody why you would like money from them, what are they paying for. It allows to give some context to their transactions rather than the 13 or so uppercase characters that you get if you do it through your online bank. So this all seems fine. This seems like a really useful feature. This is a thing we would like to exist in the world. Except they didn't realize that having a messaging platform opens a vector for harassment. And we can see here somebody's abusive ex used that messaging platform to send them abusive messages for months. And Square Cash never thought, maybe we should allow people to block each other. Because why would you want to block somebody sending you money? I like receiving money. You all like receiving money. Money, money, money. And to their credit, when this was posted and when this tweet went viral, they very quickly closed a loophole. But this doesn't change the fact that for months, somebody had to put up with harassment that was available through their platform. And this is one of the big problems with thinking about user safety, with thinking about harassment, is that if we let it be an afterthought, it becomes expensive. It's harder to retrofit later, and it often means that our users have to learn the hard way all of the rough edges of our platform. And this is a shame, because I fundamentally believe that most developers mean well. The Square Cash developers wanted to make a better way to send money to each other. They didn't want to build a tool for harassment. I assume most people at PyCon UK are pretty nice. I'm assuming you're all the same way. So how do we do this? How do we think about this? Because the sad truth is, if you allow user-to-user interactions, you have the possibility of harassment on your platform. Ever since we've had the means of communication, whether it's talking, writing, sending images to each other, people have been using it to send nasty messages to other people. Most people are fundamentally nice, but there are some bad people out there, and we do have to think about them. So what does online harassment look like? These are some examples. There's a lot of it. You'll see things like sending nasty messages, and this goes all the way from spam and phishing through to rape threats and death threats, posting of personal information, identity theft, revenge porn, and many, many more things that I'm sure you can think of that didn't fit on this slide. And now, on the one hand, personal harassment isn't a new thing, right? It didn't suddenly spring up in the 1980s when we invented the internet. People were being harassed long before that. What online harassment changes, I think, is the scale and the scope of it. Because the internet allows me to talk to people much further away, halfway around the world. And that's a fantastic thing. But it means that I can be harassed by somebody from halfway around the world. Somebody who I've never met in person, who I might never meet in person, can still send me horrible messages through the internet. And of course, the expansion of technology, the rapid expansion of technology has enabled new vectors of harassment. Take, for example, sharing intimate photos without permission, sometimes called revenge porn. So here, two people in a consensual, loving relationship take intimate photographs of each other and share them with each other. And this is a fine thing to do between consenting adults. 30 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to do that because taking a photograph was relatively expensive. You probably needed a large camera, you would need to go to a specialist, to a store to get the film developed, and sending photographs required putting a stamp on an envelope. Today, we all have cameras in our pockets. In fact, I have at least 3 cameras standing at this podium. And in the room, we probably have at least 200 or 300 cameras. It's much, much easier to take these photographs, and it's much, much easier to share them. That's something that didn't exist, that couldn't have existed 30 years ago, and now is commonplace. And as technology continues to expand, new vectors of harassment crop up. So I'm not going to go into any more detail about this because I'm assuming most of you are familiar with it. But one thing I do want to stress is that this is a thing that has an impact on people. When I was younger, a lot of people used to say about, online bullying and so on, it's just words on the internet. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect people. Anybody heard that? I'm seeing, a few hands in the audience. And I think when I was younger, a few of us used to believe that. And then one day we came into school and we were told that one of our friends wasn't coming back. She'd been bullied on Facebook. I was 16. She'd been bullied on Facebook and she'd jumped off a bridge. People stopped saying that words on the internet didn't matter after that, but I think it was a bit late for her. So I want to stress very importantly, what people say on the internet, what is said through online platforms, that has an effect on people. It is a nasty thing. It is not just words on the internet. It's not just words on a screen. And I think if you're building a platform where people interact, where you have user-to-user interaction, it is to a certain degree your responsibility to think about what people are doing on there and to think about the effects that might have beyond your platform. So, this is all pretty nasty stuff. Who's doing it? I think we often have this as the popular image of a hacker, a malicious person on the internet. And we can see they tick all the hacker stereotypes. They're wearing a hoodie. They're in a darkened basement. They have green text projected on their face. And maybe this is the sort of person we need to worry about when we're thinking about somebody stealing passwords from our database or gaining root access to our servers or doing malicious anonymous things against us as a service. But what I'm really talking about with harassment is much more targeted. It's directed against a particular person. And the sort of people who tend to do online harassment is the same as the people who do personal harassment in the real world. So let's think about who those people might be. It could be an abusive partner or an ex. It could be family members. It could be classmates. Kids often don't have the best social skills and will say pretty mean things. Co-workers and ex-co-workers. Friends and ex-friends. That one-date weirdo. Another thing that the internet has opened up for us. Today you can go online. There are many online dating sites, and in many ways this is a wonderful thing. But now, before you ever meet somebody, they can download your entire Facebook profile, your Twitter feed, your Instagram photos. They know a huge amount about you. And if you decide the date didn't go so well and they disagree, they now have many more means of finding you and tracking you later. Rogue sysadmins. So what are your sysadmins doing with your data? Do you trust some of the people who set up the early Facebook servers? And oppressive regimes. Again, well, that's something that we are lucky enough not to have to deal with in this country, mostly. But if you are building a global service, you may have users in environments like that who would like to come after your users, who would like to come after their data, and you need to be thinking about that when you build your service. What you will notice about these is that none of these people are anonymous hackers who live in a basement in Russia and wear hoodies and drink bad coffee. Russia are not lucky enough to have Brodies. The pattern we see with online harassment is the same as the pattern we see with personal harassment. People are more likely to be hurt by people they know. And this is very scary because a lot of the people we know are inherently more dangerous individuals than anonymous faceless people on the internet. People like our family members or our friends, they have physical access to us. They probably know our intimate secrets. They probably know the answer to your security questions. In fact, just out of curiosity, put your hands up in the room if you know somebody else's phone passcode. I'm just curious. I would say maybe that's 2/3 of the room. Right, and you're all nice people, right? Right? I'm not seeing the entire audience nodding, which is a little bit concerning. But imagine if you were a nasty person. Imagine if you wanted to go through somebody else's messages, go through their Facebook feed, go through their private texts. You could do that. Please don't. Don't try this at home. But you could do that. You have access to do that. And that makes these people quite scary. And a lot of the ways we might otherwise protect ourselves, all the security, all the two-factor in the world doesn't help if you have physical access to a person and their device. And of course, again, physical access can go beyond just the tools that we think about, beyond digital tools. It can also come down to simple acts of physical harm. Somebody who lives 600 miles away from me is going to struggle to physically hurt me, but somebody who lives in the same house as me is going to have very little trouble doing that. So, this is all very upsetting. There are horrible people in the world. They do horrible things. They might be living in the same house as you. So maybe we should all go and hide under a tinfoil blanket and never leave our room. This would not be particularly productive. The good news is that it doesn't have to be this way. There are tools and techniques we can use to build services to reduce the risk of harassment. We can never stop all the nasty people in the world, but we can do better. There are ways to create platforms that are not just open to facilitate all forms of abuse. We can do better than Twitter.com. So how can we protect our users? I'm going to walk through some best practice for the rest of the presentation. The first thing I want to stress is that a lot of users who are at risk of harassment are essentially normal users. They want to use your service for the same reason as everyone else. And that might be fun, it might be work, it might be because they're doing creative projects, all sorts of reasons, same reasons as anybody else would use something. Now, they might also be using it for reasons of looking for an escape, looking to improve their morale, looking for support, but a lot of the reasons will align with the rest of your users. As this means that making your service better for vulnerable users, users who are at high risk of harassment, can make it better for everyone. As an example of this, sorry, did I hear something in the audience? Right, sorry, I misheard something there. So, going back to this. Take email spam. We all probably get most of us, I imagine, in this room get a small number of emails. We get a trickle of spam. If we were to turn off all our spam filtering and just take all of the messages that come to our inbox, it would not be overwhelming for us. We could cope with it. It'd be annoying, but we could deal with it. But a lot of spam filtering technology was designed originally for people who were just overwhelmed in spam, drowning in it, thousands of messages a day. They couldn't keep up. Those services were built for them, but then we, people who don't really need that but would still benefit from it, we get the side benefits of that. And in the same way, there are lots of ways people will use these techniques to make it better for everyone. So what's the first thing you can do? First of all, diversify the team. Now, I talked about this a lot last year. There's a video, go watch it, but I won't talk about it in too much detail again here. The important thing to note is that we are all individuals. We all have a single lived experience. And there are people who are different from us, who have to worry about different things, who have to worry about different forms of harassment. For example, I'm male. I do not generally have to worry about being harassed at a tech conference. I don't have to worry about being harassed on the bus. I don't have to worry about what happens if I'm sitting on the train and a slightly skeevy older dude sits down next to me. I have some basic understanding of those things, but they don't really permeate my sphere of consciousness in the same way they might if I was a woman. So if I'm designing a service, I want to have a woman on the team who has that lived experience and who would instantly spot this is something you're doing that might be dangerous to somebody. Let's look at an example which I imagine many of you may have used before, many of you may be familiar with. Git. Now, Git is a fantastic version control tool. Hands up in the rooms if you use Git. Keep your hands up if you have used Git today. That's still quite a few hands. Fantastic tool, isn't it? Git was the original blockchain. Sorry, I was trying to say nice things about it. And one of the fantastic features of Git is that the history is immutable, right? So we do all our commits, and then that history is immutable. Nobody can ever change it without fundamentally breaking the repository and it being very obvious. This is a good thing, right? That's a feature. Yes? Seeing nodding, good. One of the things Git bakes into that commit history, that is immutable, that you can never change, is your name. Your name is irrevocably part of the commit history. It is available forever and is publicly browsable in the history of a Git repository. Can we ever think of scenarios where somebody would change their name? If you've not read the blog post Assumptions Programmers Make About Names, really is recommended, and this is a big one. There are lots of reasons somebody might change their name. They might get married, which you may notice is something that it predominantly happens to one gender over another. They might get divorced, and they might want to get away from the fact that they were once in a difficult marriage. They might be trans and want to get away from their dead name. There are lots of reasons why somebody might want to change their name and not have it permanently baked into the history of a repository, not have it permanently available. When Git was originally put together in the early 2000s, I don't think the Linux kernel team was particularly diverse. I don't think they had many trans people on the team, because I think if they did, somebody might have looked at this and said, hey, is this a problem? So there's a lot of value in having a diverse team who can look at something like this and tell you about it before you ship it to millions of users and only spot it 15 years later when it's a bit late. So think about diversifying the team. While we're talking about names, let's talk about name policies. Because there is a commonly held belief that if we ask everyone on the internet to use their real name, that will magically make them behave. Because when we have anonymous discussion, that causes all the problems, right? People can write anything without impunity, and people can write anything with impunity and not worry about the reputational cost. And this is wrong in both directions. First of all, it's perfectly possible to have very friendly anonymous discussion. This is just one example of a thread, and people are having a very civil discussion about making tea and coffee. Perfectly reasonable. 6,000 comments, and they are all civil, polite, and well-mannered. So how did this happen? Is this just an internet gem that was hidden away, protected from the world, hidden from the sunlight, that I've now exposed by putting their URL on a big screen? No, it's because they had a really strong and active set of moderators. People who were looking at the content, stamping down on bad behavior, stamping down on people making abusive comments. You can do anonymous discussion, it's just expensive. For many people, it's too expensive, but don't buy into the lie that civil anonymous discussion is possible. The other side of this, though, is the idea that people care about the reputation associated with their real name. And I don't think that's true. I think we can all think of people on a certain website whose name might sound a bit like a bird, who write awful, awful things, some of whom may be presidents of major countries, and somehow get away with this impunity and feel no blowback for the fact that they are utterly, utterly awful, reprehensible human beings. I should make a note that this is my personal opinion and not the opinion of PyCon UK or my employer. There's also the problem, though, that defining a real name is actually really hard. Another assumption programmers make about names. Because some people have multiple names. So I have a Chinese name and my British name that you all know me by. Some people don't have passports, so they don't have an official name attached to it. There's not a name you can prove. What about organizations, corporations? What exactly are you calling your real name? This is a really hard thing to define, and probably not a problem you are actually interested in solving. Whatever platform you're trying to build, this is probably not it. The other thing to consider is that connecting wallet names to identities itself can actually be a source of harassment. We're all here because we are in the tech industry. And generally speaking, we associate our wallet name with the name we go by online in professional circles at these conferences. And that's because there's a lot of benefit for us doing so. We're here to get jobs potentially, do speaking opportunities. It's really useful to have your wallet name attached to it. But we can imagine communities and discussion spaces where that might not be the case. Maybe you've got a support group for young trans people who aren't sure about their identity and are trying to talk to other people and connect with like minds. Maybe you've got a group for young LGBT folks or people who are in abusive homes. Maybe you've got a community about sex and kink. Which, again, all perfectly reasonable things to have on the internet, but if you start connecting those people back to their wallet names, the names they might be known under in the physical world, and in turn allowing people in the physical world to connect back to their online identity, that in itself potentially opens the door to harassment. So the way I prefer is to go for pseudonyms, which are a good middle ground used by a number of services. So think carefully about your name policies. Third thing, moving on, robust privacy controls. So as a minimum, you should have a way to ban and block malicious users, both at a platform and an individual level. I consider this table stakes for most services. We saw this earlier, Square Cache didn't do it. I'm still amazed that Slack doesn't do it and forces all that onto overworked HR teams. And you, of course, would have a way to kick abusive users off your platform. Even if you really want to be a bastion of free speech, which you probably don't, there will at some point come somebody writing something that you probably don't want on your platform. So think about that. This is one of the things that Twitter actually gets right. They have a blocking feature. This is what it looks like. So I blocked somebody here. What you'll notice, though, is that they tell you that. So it says, you are blocked from following Alex W.L. Chan and viewing Alex W.L. Chan's tweets. And imagine you went to my Twitter profile after this talk and you saw that. Would that make you feel happy, respected, like you were somebody that I liked? Hopefully not. You would probably feel quite annoyed, quite upset at me, and you might decide to take that out on me. Right? Imagine that we were living in the same house and you discover that I blocked you. That might be its own trigger for retaliation. So another thing you can look at is things like shadow blocking, muting, allow people to block somebody without it ever being visible to the other person they're blocked, avoiding that possibility of retribution. Offer granular access controls. So the default is public-private, but you can go more granular than that. You could have followers only, so that's the Twitter model. I can post things that only pre-approved followers can see, maybe only mutuals only, down to the level of individual users. So you look at sites like Facebook, LiveJournal, Dreamwidth, they offer really granular permissions for who can see every post, and you can decide that on a per-post, per-person basis. And this is one of those things that actually people use for really interesting and creative purposes, aside from just not letting people they don't like see their content. This is one of those features that people have used in interesting ways. And this time an example of Facebook getting it right. They have some pretty granular privacy settings. They have some pretty granular controls, and not just of what I'm writing. I can choose who can send me friend requests, who can see my friends lists. I changed that setting after taking this screenshot, and you should all go and check it yourselves. Who can see my future posts. You can also go back and review your past posts. That's really important as well. Don't make it immutable. If somebody posts something and then realizes, maybe I don't want that for a wide audience, allow them to go back and change it later. And again, offering granular access controls, if you make it easy to change, people are more comfortable because they don't have to publish something for the entire world to see, and that's going to make them more likely to attract more engagement, as people like to say. Number 4, rushing on, don't rely on technology to solve human problems. So you need human moderation because you don't have context. You don't know everything that happens on or off your service. Here's an example of a text I got this morning. Someone sent me a picture of a flower. They're thinking of me. And if this is a friend from home and they know I've got this big talk today, that's really nice. If it's the stalker who rang my hotel room 6 times last night and left me a bunch of flowers at reception, that's perhaps not so nice. But if that's the only 2 things your moderators can see, your machine can see, it doesn't know how to make a decision based on that. You need the additional context that goes with it. So context is important. Give people a way to report problems and believe them. Treat problems in good faith. And finally, look after your moderators. This is an important one as well. I'm talking mostly today about online harassment, personal harassment. There are lots of other awful things on the internet. Child pornography, sexual abuse, rape imagery, animal harm, torture imagery. And these are really awful, horrific things that your moderators will have to look at every time somebody reports it and says, hey, maybe this is a bad thing that you don't want to be allowing on your platform. Look after them, make sure they're supported, counseled, have breaks and so on, because looking at this stuff really hurts people. And briefly, this is a tweet from Ra, who was the LiveJournal Trust and Safety. 40% of people burnt out within 3 months of having to go through the cesspit of human interaction. So human moderation is best. And finally, design with abusive personas in mind. We're used to designing with personas where we think about trying to help people. How can I make this flow easier for them, make my service better for them? Think in the opposite direction. Imagine somebody really awful wants to use my service. How are they going to use it to cause harm? And how can I make their life as difficult as possible? So there's a summary slide, some ways that you can protect your users, make it better. Diversify your team, think about your name policies, robust privacy controls, human moderation, design with abusive personas in mind. Like I said, these things will not catch everything, but they will catch a lot, and they will make your service better. And I'll leave you with this. Always, when you're building something, ask, how could this be used to hurt someone? How could an abusive ex misuse this? Because if you don't answer those questions, somebody else will answer them for you. and your users will get hurt in the process. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Alex. I'm sure he'll be more than welcome to talk about it afterwards as well. We don't have any time for questions, I'm afraid. We'll see you in 5 minutes.